Well, joining me now is Susan Michie, a health psychologist from University College London and member of the government's Behaviour Science Advisory Committee, and the behavioural scientist Magda Osman from Queen Mary's University. Susan Michie first. The Prime Minister is making a national TV address in just over half an hour. Would you like to see him announcing a full national lockdown, forcing people to stay at home?
Well, I think what we've seen so far is that people haven't been following the very general advice, but the advice has only been very general. There hasn't been instruction to stay at home. People have been told to not take part in non-essential travel, but it's not clear what non-essential is, or to significantly limit seeing friends and family. What does significantly limit mean? So I do think we need clear instructions as to what people need to do.
And your committee advises the government. Do you think, have you been sending that message to the government? Have you been listened to?
I should say that I'm speaking as an individual expert, not as a member of that committee, and we submit our evidence, and the evidence is taken on board, but alongside evidence that comes from modelers, evidence that comes from clinicians and virologists, evidence that comes from people who know about the state of the health service. All of that gets put into a pot and then presumably combined with other political and economic decisions that we're not party to.
So why do you think the government hasn't gone further, faster?
I think it's difficult to know. From where I am, I probably haven't got any more information than other people have. I think at the beginning, there was a concern that maybe the population wouldn't go along with what the government was trying to do in terms of restricting people's freedoms and what they're used to. But I think it's become quite clear that the population are not only supportive of what's being done, but want more to be done. I think that's become very clear over the last couple of weeks.
Let me put that to Magda Osman. The population, citizens of the UK, want the government to go further. Do you agree with that?
Well, they might do, but I think this is where also the media have a role to play in reinforcing the necessary changes that we have to make to our lives. So, for instance, if you see images of people flouting the social distancing rules, then you might use that as a way to reinforce your own behaviours. If you see images of empty streets, then that also has a consequence. So the extent to which we want to actually regulate our behaviours is in relation to how other people behave. So the more you reinforce the fact that it's important to maintain social distancing and home isolation, and you see images that reinforce that also through the media, because that's a source by which we receive information, is no doubt going to be significant to the way people adapt and change their behaviour.
So would you be happy for the government to keep nudging people in the right direction rather than saying you must stay inside and we're going to make sure that you do?
I think we have to recognise the responsibilities and roles that we play, and also that our actions have consequences on the immediate people around us. So, and also on top of that, people rely on multiple sources of information to determine how it is that they need to act. So
let me just go back to Susan Michie now. Of course, there are significant mental and physical health consequences of being locked inside, forced to stay inside. Are you concerned about the consequences, particularly for people living in cramped flats, that this might actually be putting their lives more at risk by forcing them to stay inside?
Absolutely. I think we've got to think through the consequences of what people will be asked to do. So one issue that's really important and hasn't been solved and has been on the table for a couple of weeks now is self-employed people and people in the gig economy. There are millions and millions in this country, and they can't afford to stay at home. £90 a week will not feed a family. So the government has to put in place policies that will make it possible, practically, financially, materially possible for people to stay at home. They also need to make sure there's proper resourcing of communities, mobilisation of communities, so that people feel looked after and cared for in their own home. And also they need to make sure that everybody has the communication channels so they can keep in touch with their family, friends, their loved ones, in whatever way is needed, that nobody is cut off. So there are certain things that need to be put in place very rapidly if this policy is going to work.
Magda, Osman, tens of thousands of Italians have been caught flouting the lockdown rules. If lockdown is imposed, and if the Prime Minister does announce something of the sort, do you think Britons will be more disciplined than that or not?
Well, I think in general what will happen is that the more that the social distancing and home isolation is reinforced and you see more people accept that, then what you'll see is some form of social norming. So that is as I said, people regulate the way they behave relative to others. So the more that you see people actually staying at home, social distancing, that will have a reinforcing effect on the way that each individual decides how to act. So the more of that you see, the more likely it is that people will be compliant with that. The issue is how you sustain that for a long period of time.
Susan, Michie, do you agree with that?
I do. And if you look at the evidence, there are a range of problems of people living in this sort of isolation conditions. People can get frustrated, they can get bored, they can get lonely, they can get depressed. These things get worse over time. And also, over a long period of time, people have a tendency not to adhere to it so much. So this is why all these things need to be attended to.
And is there any guarantee that total lockdown of the kind we've seen in China, Italy, France, that it works? Because China's just coming out of that. We don't actually know if it's going to stop a second wave of the infections, do we?
Well, that's a whole other question. I mean, there's one thing about will the isolation work in terms of will people stay in their houses and not go out and infect each other is what's happening at the moment. That's something we can discuss right now. The issue about a second wave really needs to have epidemiologists and virologists and people who know a lot about pandemics, and that's beyond what I know about.
Fair enough. And Magda, Osman, you've seen businesses closing down before the government's told them to. The government said takeaway shops can stay open, they're closing down. Is there a sense in which businesses are leading this and the government's following?
So I can't speak to that necessarily, but what I'll reiterate is the main point that I'm making, which is that the more signals that you receive from multiple sources and from multiple organisations that are adopting social distancing and home isolation, the more likely it is that you're going to have people adhere to that. So the second issue is, well, once you're in lockdown, you're at home for a long period of time, how do you stay healthy? How do you maintain sort of mental and physical health?
Yeah.
So, people will be tempted to want to go out and run. They can't go to the gym anymore. So we have to be, and we are, ingenious and adaptive in the way that we can change our behaviours. So there needs to be a positive spin on this, which is how can we stay at home and stay healthy, exercise, learn new habits, which is what we'll have to do. So we need to start adapting our behaviours. And there's positive ways that we can actually do that. So people are actually interacting with each other through social media or on the phone more and so on. And more of that is needed.